How's everyone doing this morning?
Very good.
Oh, come on, that was lackluster. How's everyone doing this morning? Great. My name is David Salzer. With me today is Patrick Santoso. I want to thank Bill, URISA, and IAAO for having us here today to talk about something that's very close to our hearts, the New Hampshire Mosaic, which is a compilation of GIS and CAMA data from 235 separate taxing jurisdictions that we have in our great small state of New Hampshire. So we'll start out with a really simple idea. People want maps, and I know that sounds very basic, but if you think about the history of our society, maps have been an integral part from the beginning of time. They let people understand the world around them, they better help them interpret it, and it enables them to share that information with other people. More so now than ever, maps are in the hands of more people. Why? Smartphones. Everybody now has a plethora of geospatial information at their fingertips on a smartphone. So here's our little digital smartphone we'll use for the presentation. So the first thing we did when we thought about Albuquerque was look at a map, plan our trip. Am I going to use Apple Maps? Probably not. I don't want to get lost. I want to figure out where I'm going accurately. Am I going to use Google Maps? Yes, and thank God I can get it on my iPhone again. And I think a lot of other people agree with me. Google Maps for mobile only has 100 million monthly users. Think about that, 100 million users accessing maps on their phones. So if we shake this out and bring it into full screen, first thing we did was look, how do we go from the small location we have in New Hampshire to Albuquerque? A little less than 2,300 miles. We considered driving, but then we thought of it again. So a couple different ways to get here. The first one was to get in a plane in Boston, fly to Washington, D.C., sit in the airport for 4 hours, and continue on. Total travel time about 9 hours. But Patrick and I have some business associates in Denver, and we've been meaning to meet with them. And over time, we said, you know, we have to plan a trip in the late spring of 2013. So why don't we try to kill two birds with one stone? Albuquerque is within a reasonable driving distance, as we learned yesterday, from Denver. So instead, we decided we would fly from Boston, direct to Denver, meet with our business associates, rent a car, and it was a Passat, it was not a fancy red convertible, and then drive Thelma and Louise style down here to give this presentation. Total travel time, 11 hours. So that's 2 more hours of travel time, but all of a sudden we're saving a ton of money and maximizing our time. And nothing gets me more excited than using geospatial data to save money and maximize my effort. So, geospatial data fuels decision making. I think that's why we're all here. Everyone sees the value of this information and uses it to fuel their decision making and analysis processes. One of the first known instances of geospatial information leading to decision making, and not from the caveman era, of course, would be this depiction from 1853 of a cholera outbreak in London. John Snow went out and mapped each of the locations where a household had an outbreak of cholera. He also went out and mapped all of the well locations where people were pulling their public water from. First thing he noticed was a dense cluster right around that center red point we're seeing, which happened to be the Broad Street well. John Snow turned off that well and effectively ended the cholera outbreak in Regent Park of 1853 in London. So that was one of the first known uses of geospatial information leading to effective decision making. Geospatial data fuels decision making on all levels of our life, whether you realize it or not. If you're an individual, I'm sure a lot of people, first thing they did when they got here is pulled out their smartphone, said, what's the best restaurant in close proximity to me? Should I check in at a bar so my friends know where I am? How do I get driving directions if I want to get to a hotel? Corporations are using this data more than ever. Not only are they mining the information that you're providing them through your cell phone, and they're using that to determine where should they build their next store, what's the best, most effective route for shipping. How do I use this information for better business intelligence to maximize my profits and reduce my effort? We're really here today to talk about our project, which was a government-focused project. Government has a huge need for geospatial information. We're going to hit on a couple of the key things that government uses that information for. Disaster recovery, that's a big one. Regional planning, environmental protection, and utilities management. Of course, there are many other uses, but we're going to focus on these four because they're kind of pertinent to the project that we executed. What type of geospatial information is needed to execute these kinds of tasks, though? Well, you need property boundaries, you need land use, you need address information, you need to know information about what types of structures exist, their quality, their condition, valuation information, owner information. There's one place where all this information can be found, the parcel maps and the CAMA data, the reason we're all here this week. Parcel maps and CAMA data are a very effective tool for doing assessing and doing other projects, and I think for a long time that information's been held and used for those purposes. And we like to say, for us, this data is old news. As we talked about, this is the 17th meeting of this group. I mean, when this conference first started, I was 12 years old, just to put that in a frame of context for you. So it's not, the data's not old and the concepts aren't old, but for this group of people, we've been working with this information for a long time and we see the power of it. As Patrick and I go around the country talking to people who aren't necessarily well-versed in parcel map and CAMA data, they get very excited by the prospect of getting this kind of information. We say for them, this is the next big thing. We work with the Department of Revenue Administration in New Hampshire, and they knew the power of this information, and they needed to aggregate it into a composite, which we did. And now that information is being used by almost every agency in the state. They're seeing this as the next big thing in how to fuel their business processes and their decision making. Local government has led this technology for a very long time, and what we like to call the three keys to the life cycle of data: the collecting of information, the modeling, and then the dissemination of this information to the people who need it. Now you could say, I guess in another way, this could be get it done, run the numbers, and serve it up. The different tracks we're all here to the different tracks we're all here to learn about this week, but I think it's very apropos, and Pat and I both, when we first read the conference planner, we thought, wow, this is really interesting, because those are really the three keys to information: collecting it effectively, modeling it, and serving it out to people who need it. And then that whole process returns and loops around. There's a huge challenge that still remains out there in this industry, though. And that's where one map ends and the next one begins. When you get to the end of a parcel map, you're entering this vapid white space of nothingness. We like to say it's like going off the edge of the world. State government in particular has the need for this information, aggregating this information on a larger scale, and they struggle with it. Different states have taken different tactics on how to compile and standardize the statewide information. So for us, it's a matter of bringing this information together and then creating a standard. Sounds very simple. But in New Hampshire, we have 235 taxing jurisdictions. Now, for most of you, that would be a county. So think of your state with 235 counties, each that has their own local control over parcel maps, CAMA data, and basically everything. We do have 10 counties in New Hampshire. They're responsible for deed registration and sheriff's offices. They have no other involvement in the entire taxing process. Out of these 235 taxing jurisdictions, we have about 680,000 taxable properties. And I know for a larger state, that's probably one county or half of a county. And we have about 600,000 physical parcels. We have about 1.3 million people in New Hampshire. So you can see we're divided very thoroughly. There are a lot of different factions in the state. Now, over the past 3 years, Patrick and I worked on what we call the New Hampshire Mosaic Parcel Map Project. And that brings all that data together into one single usable format. Now, I want to jump in a little bit and talk about New Hampshire, because I know not everyone's familiar with the Granite State. You might know our motto, live free or die. We are one of the original 13 colonies, and we're very passionate about governance. So New Hampshire, you can see right in the middle there, we're between Vermont and Maine. About 40 miles north of Boston is our southern border, and that's where the majority of the population in our state is from. Between the Atlantic Ocean and what we call the Merrimack River corridor on the left side of the screen. Now, just looking a little bit further, Portsmouth is our port city, one of the oldest operating ports in the country. It's a quaint New England town with brick buildings. It's also one of the locations where, the only location, in the U.S., where a foreign war treaty has been signed, the Treaty of Portsmouth, which ended the Russo-Japanese War. Looking at the Merrimack River corridor, we have three major cities: the city of Nashua, which is the gate city, which is about 30 miles north of Boston. The city of Manchester, which is our largest city, has about 100,000 residents. And we'll get back to the capital, Concord, in a second, but just to step back. As you move further north in our state, you see towards the bottom of the screen Lake Winnipesaukee, which is a famous recreation destination, and moving further north into the White Mountains, then what we call the Great North Woods, the population drops dramatically. From the bottom of the screen north, we have about 60,000 residents. So the majority of those 1.3 million people live in the southern portion of the state, so there's a big disparity as far as population density in New Hampshire. Going back to our capital city of Concord, it's a small city on the Merrimack River, where our entire state government is run from our state house. One of the interesting things about New Hampshire, we have a 424-person state legislature. That's 24 senators and 400 representatives. Sorry. Oh, it gets better, believe me. If the U.S. government had this level of representation, we'd have 99,000 representatives. So if you think nothing gets done in Washington now, imagine where things would be headed. Probably the most interesting part of this, the maximum annual salary is $200. People do this because they love governance, and this is what I was saying about New Hampshire. People are very passionate about being involved. Local government is generally a select board, town meeting style government, which you see almost everywhere in New England. And that means the legislative power is in the hands of the people. Every expenditure of the town is voted on by the town residents. They have an extreme say in what happens. The executive power is in the hands of the selectmen, or the town fathers. And this is a select board from a town about 2 over where Patrick and I live. You have 3 to 5 member committees, and they work part-time. They usually come in once or twice a week in the evening to hold select board meetings, and they make all executive decisions on behalf of the town. There's nothing more exciting than driving 3 hours, sitting in front of a committee like this and explaining them why you need to take all the information they pay to build. So as far as New Hampshire goes, we have one of the lowest tax burdens in the country. As you can see here, this graph shows state and local tax burden as a percentage of state income. Almost every other state in New England's in the top 10. The dark blue represents top 10, and the white represents the bottom 10. And there we have New Hampshire at number 44, one of the lowest tax states in the country. Why? We have no state income tax. We have no state sales tax. We do have property tax. Property tax accounts for about $3.5 billion that goes to municipalities, counties, districts. There are 2 unique entities that play a role in this process. We have the State of New Hampshire Department of Revenue Administration. They oversee all assessments, standards, and practices, including revaluation. They annually conduct the property tax equalization process to ensure that common tax burdens are distributed fairly and equitably. And they're also responsible for setting the property tax rates in conjunction with the municipalities. The taxing jurisdictions, they have a unique role too. They build and maintain all the parcel map and CAMA data at their own discretion. There are 7,000 unique land use codes in New Hampshire. Every taxing jurisdiction has the right to generate their own codes. And in a state with so much involvement in government, there's also an extreme sense of local government, where every municipality or taxing jurisdiction wants to do their own thing and doesn't want to be told by anyone else, especially the state, to do differently. Taxing jurisdictions are also responsible for the property tax billing and collections process. So let's look at what kind of data we have in New Hampshire. This is parcel data, and you can see that 90% of the parcels statewide are in a GIS format. Another 7% are in composite AutoCAD. So 97% of the information in the state is in a GIS or GIS-ready format. Now you can see in the image on the right that there are a lot of municipalities that still have paper maps, but some of them might have less than 300 parcels per municipality. CAMA data. We have about 6 different systems operating in the state. 2 have the lion's share of the clients. One of them is a local system that I don't think operates anywhere outside of New Hampshire, and it's meant for small towns with not a lot of commercial or industrial property. But every municipality in the state uses a CAMA system, even municipalities with under 300 parcels. So that's a real accomplishment, I think, for some of the smaller jurisdictions. We have a very unique GIS structure in New Hampshire, mostly because we have no structure. We have limited central organization, we have no GIO, and there's minimal collaboration between the states and the local government. So if we look at the state as a whole, you have 4 major agencies that are considered to be the major GIS players: transportation, safety, fish and game, and environmental services. You have a number of smaller agencies that also do GIS projects. We've only shown 5 of them here, but there are probably about 15 different agencies doing small-scale GIS work. Serving their needs are the universities doing research projects, the not-for-profits doing research projects and consulting work, and private companies providing software and consulting services. Now imagine all these different entities operating in the GIS environment and not speaking to each other for the most part. This creates what we like to call the Wild West of GIS. We have our little GIS tumbleweed. And it really is a free-for-all. There were other people starting to do parcel projects in the state when we began our project. So who am I and how did I end up here? That's probably a good question. I'm with the Technology Transfer Center at UNH, and we're a think tank consulting group, and we work with different government agencies and utility companies on a bunch of different projects. We develop different solutions, and a lot of our clients are obviously in New Hampshire. And we deal with utilities. We create utility infrastructure and outage management systems, most based in GIS as well. And over the past 6 years, we developed a sustainable composite parcel mapping system, which we call Mosaic. Now, to just jump into the early history here of how we got started, the director of the Technology Transfer Center, who Pat and I work for, started promoting the idea of an AutoCAD parcel map in the early 1990s. And there wasn't a lot of traction. Most municipalities in New Hampshire were still using paper maps, and they didn't see the value necessarily of moving to an AutoCAD map conversion. So Dr. Goodspeed tabled the idea, and Pat and I started working with him in the mid-2000s on some GIS asset collection projects, and we thought, well, this idea of a composite parcel map really could pick up steam. It could be something that really is useful for a lot of different people in the state. So we started pushing very heavily with one of our primary sponsors, the DOT, and they said, you know, we could use that for a lot of different things, but there's so much disparity in what's going on across the state. Let's see some kind of feasibility study. Is this actually even possible? So in 2008, we did 6 taxing jurisdictions. I know, we really covered a lot of ground. And we pulled up maybe about 30,000 CAMA records, excuse me. And the DOT saw the value in it, but they said, what about all the municipalities who won't participate? We have no ability to force them into participation, and having an incomplete Mosaic isn't really worth our while. So concurrent to this, at the Department of Revenue Administration, they brought in a new property appraisal director. 3 days later, a tornado hit New Hampshire, an EF2, and it damaged 100 properties in 9 municipalities. The governor's office then turned to the property appraisal director, who had been in office for 3 days, and said, I need a list of all the properties that were damaged. I need a preliminary damage assessment report. He looked around in his office, had none of the tax records, had none of the maps necessary. So he had to send his field team out now to all these municipalities who were dealing with a major disaster and said, I need CAMA records. I'm here to help you. I'm from the state. Which didn't exactly go well. It took them about 2 weeks to prepare the damage report. And they did end up getting federal funding for it. But they realized 2 weeks was way too long of a period. This tornado also went into Maine, and we're always in competition with Maine. So we were trying to get funding faster than they were. We need to get the report out quickly. Not long after that, the Department of Revenue Administration brought in a new commissioner. The first thing he said is, where's the statewide GIS? He had come from the city of Manchester, where they have a full-blown web GIS system, and he assumed upon arrival at the Department of Revenue, they had a similar system that had all parcels in the state. He was sorely mistaken and a little bit frustrated. One of the reasons they brought him in was to develop a capital improvements project to modernize the department. And one of his key projects was going to be the development of a statewide GIS. That's what we call the Grant to Green project. The Department of Revenue developed this to improve their data collection, processing, and business intelligence systems. Mosaic is seen as a tool to fuel the property appraisal division, obviously, but also the audit and collections division. Knowing where all these different people are located and what property exists where is very important for audit and collections. But we still hadn't convinced anyone yet. We were still kind of starting from scratch, and the Department of Revenue said there's so many people around the state saying this is a bad idea and it's not possible. Not necessarily technically, but politically, not a possible project. They wanted us to do another pilot project. So we did 20 taxing jurisdictions and about 117,000 CAMA records. The Department of Revenue immediately lit up and said, this is the direction we want to move in. This is the future of the department. But we have one more question for you. Do you know how to equalize? Pat and I looked at each other and kind of said, well, it couldn't be too hard, right? So they gave us a bunch of statistics and said, replicate these. So we replicated the statistics, and we would later on find out there was much more to the process. And for those of you who don't know what property tax equalization is, it's the process of analyzing real estate transactions that occur within a fixed period to identify the relationship between assessed value and market value. And that's done through the use of a sales ratio. Now, Patrick and I had only seen the end statistics and weren't aware of the whole process that went into it, and as we started to learn more, we found out that this was the system that the Department of Revenue was using in-house and the municipalities were using. Now, as I said, when this conference first started, I was 12, so clearly I had never used a piece of software like this that was a DOS-based system. So the first thing Pat and I did was laugh at them, and when we stopped laughing, they said, you know, we'd like you guys to help us develop something new, and Mosaic will be the backbone of this because the CAMA data is necessary to fuel the system. So with that, I'll turn it over to Patrick, and he'll talk about how we made out.
Thank you, David. Good morning, everyone. Kind of feel like I need a stool or something, but that's okay. All right, let's talk a little bit more in detail about these two systems that we've developed. On the one hand, the Mosaic parcel map, which is kind of where we were driving towards. That's what we were hoping to build. And then the property tax equalization system, which was essentially dumped in our lap. We had no interest in doing it, but they said, you know, look, this is a major part of our operation, and if you can't tie this in, we don't want to do either. So we had to. It worked out very well, though. It wound up being a very good idea. So if we look at the two systems, the parcel map is, of course, every parcel and CAMA record in the state compiled into one system, and then we serve that out over the web. And the property tax equalization system is a web-based .NET platform that both the Department of Revenue and all the municipalities in the state use to validate their sales and complete the equalization process. And kind of significantly, there were maybe a dozen towns, a little bit less than a dozen, that when we got started were not even using that blue screen that you saw. They were equalizing on paper, completely paper-based, which I can't believe it went on, but it did. And this year we launched the equalization system, which is tied to the map, and we have 100% of the towns working electronically. So through the process, we've moved everybody forward quite a bit. So taking a look at how these two systems connect, we have the municipalities, the taxing jurisdictions, the counties maintaining the deeds records, and we have the state, essentially the Department of Revenue, which gets a bunch of tax forms related to real estate transfer tax. Now the municipalities, of course, feed the data into the parcel map. The county registries of deeds feed into the parcel map and to the equalization system, so that gives us every real estate transaction. And then we supplement these real estate transactions with the property tax forms, the real estate transfer tax forms. So we get a lot of information about every real estate transaction from a variety of sources. These two systems are, of course, connected. The transactions are occurring on properties, which are in the CAMA system and the map, and they're both seamlessly linked. Now you have the Department of Revenue in the middle of all of this, so they're using the parcel map and the equalization system. And you have the municipalities who deal with the equalization system to validate the sales. And then the parcel map gets shared out to all of the state agencies, and they use it through a web viewer. This is already a little bit out of date because we're piloting a project, which we did for about 25 communities in the center of the state, where we're sharing the parcel map out to the local assessing communities so that they can use it for their own benefit. Which we wanted to do right off, but there were concerns about data privacy and making it public and web hosting. So we kind of waited a little bit, and I'll talk about that as we move forward. So how did we do? Anytime we give talks like this, everybody always says, you've got to tell us about the problems. We don't want to hear it was, you know, a booming success. You have to tell us what were some of the pitfalls. So here we go. In the first edition of the map, we didn't get all of the towns, and there's a good reason why. We're looking at CAMA here. This was back in 2010, 2011, and the Department of Revenue does have the statutory authority to demand the parcel map and CAMA data, which is kind of why we wound up with them in the first place. They said, you know, we have the authority to collect this, so let's do it. Contrary to our belief before we started working with them, they're actually fairly nice, reasonable people, and they said, you know, look, we don't want to force anybody to give this data. We would prefer to ask, you know, communities to volunteer it and take the burden on ourselves to convince them that this is a worthwhile endeavor. So the first edition in 2010, 2011, we got about 177 taxing jurisdictions for almost 600,000 camera records. The second edition, people started to get a lot more comfortable. This was in 2011, 2012. We got 227 of the 235 taxing jurisdictions. And largely in this case, the data that didn't come in, they were converting systems, they didn't have access to it. There were still a couple communities that weren't convinced and didn't want to participate. But if we move forward to the edition that we're wrapping up right now, we do have 100% of the CAMA in the state collected, all 235 taxing jurisdictions in. So we were very excited. And I think really that this coincides very well with the deployment of the equalization system. So it was a little bit like, if you want your tax rate, send in the data as quickly as you can. We'll get you into the system. You can validate your sales and get your tax rate quickly. So we got a flood of data this year. Taking a look at the data collection rates, I wish I could use the laser pointer, but it goes right through the screen. That bottom blue line was our first pilot edition. And then if you look up, the first edition is the green line, that kind of orange line was the second, and then the red on the third. And on the bottom axis, that's days for collecting the data. So as you can see, our rate is getting faster and faster and faster. And it's really because people are becoming more comfortable. We send out letters and say, hey, would you mind please submitting your data as soon as your values are finalized? And this year, we got a flood of data. It was more than we could really handle. We were the bottleneck in processing it into the system. So we were very excited that people were finally very comfortable with sending in their data, and we're doing it very, very rapidly. So moving over to the parcel side of the world, the other part of this equation, here's the first edition of the map. We got 158 communities. If you remember, we had 170 some odd on the first edition for CAMA. And as we found out, the reason for this is even if the assessor is very willing to give over the CAMA, sometimes he or she doesn't have direct access to the map files that we were looking for. So oftentimes it would require them to call their GIS department or their IT department to get the source files, sometimes call their map vendor and have them sent over. Oftentimes the map vendor would go, remember that CD that you get? That's it. So very often it was the trouble just getting the data in the hands of the people that would then transmit it to us. Going on to the second edition, we did much better. Only a couple holdouts, same thing, a lot of data conversion. People saying, I'd love to send you the data, but I don't have it right now. It's off at my vendor being upgraded to GIS or adding building polygons or what have you. So moving on to the third edition, we're very confident this will be completely covered. We're still receiving data every day. Another problem you run into is these are pretty big files. You can't just email over the parcel map like you can the CAMA data export. So you have to do FTPs, people burning CDs and mailing them in. So it's a little bit more time intensive to get the data in. But if you look at these maps side by side, you'll see in this edition, even though we're missing a lot of towns, and this is out of date, there's about 40 more that are not represented on this map that we've gotten in the past couple weeks. You'll notice a lot of the holes from edition 2 are already filled in. So we're very confident we'll be at 100% participation by the time we wrap up, probably in about the next 30 days. Looking again at how we did as far as timing the map collection, days on the bottom there from when we started soliciting, the rate still goes up from the pilot edition 1, edition 2, but you notice it doesn't go up as fast because again it's just not as easy to transmit those geodatabase and shape files and so forth. So you kind of reach a maximum speed on that. I think we will see the CAMA data will continue to get faster and faster though, because in most cases it's 2 or 3 clicks to get the data out. So we were talking about what we were going to show you guys in this presentation. One thing that we thought we had to show you was the actual product that we use to serve it up. We figured if we didn't, people would leave the room going, they don't have anything. I didn't see anything. I saw a bunch of graphs. So moving in, this is how we serve the data out to the state. It's the GIS viewer that we use, and all we're doing here is the standard GIS task, zooming into a town just north of Manchester, our largest city. And if you notice here in green, I know it's a little blurry, you have green, those are state-owned land, one of the things we flagged, and that river is the boundary between 2 abutting communities. So they're totally seamlessly integrated, and in any community you click on any parcel and you bring up their property information, and this is real time. I know it's a little slow, but we didn't doctor the video, this is how it really runs. And from here we go into the PDF tax card. This gives you an idea of the information that we collect from all the communities. owner name, mailing address, parcel identifier, land use type, which we convert all of those 10 million codes or 4,000, whatever it was, into state codes. There's about 40 of them. And here, just doing a quick search, and these are all the towns that are in that you can't read in the drop-down. And this is really where the state gets a lot of utility, not clicking on things, but being able to search through every CAMA record in the town by the 40 parameters that we collect. So do you want to see sales between a certain value? Do you want to see every property in the state that a certain person owns? In this case, we're looking for Smiths. And you can zoom seamlessly from town to town. You can select all of them, see all the Smiths in every town all across the state. And that's where you start getting your power bouncing around. What the state got really excited with was looking for owner names, state of New Hampshire, because believe it or not, they're not too clear on what they've purchased in the past 200 years. So we found all of that data in the local assessing records and actually flagged that for them. And now they're in a process of figuring out what to do with them because they don't need all those parcels that they own. So they want to get them back on the tax rolls and get them out of their own pockets. So Dave mentioned the tornado example. And it was a horrible tragedy, but it worked well for the project in that it jump-started everything. It brought this totally to the forefront. People said, my God, we have no capacity to assess damages in a disaster. So here's the demo that we show everybody. This is our perennial demo. This is the area where the tornado occurred. And this is the capacity, again, in real time that the Department of Revenue has to respond to a disaster like this. Of course, you get the National Guard flights the next day, practically. They give you the polygon. So what we're doing here is tracing out a fictitious tornado path in about 9 communities, I think it is, to pull all of the parcels that would be affected. And again, real time, so bear with the clicking. Processing, again, across 9 towns. There are all the properties that would have been affected, irrespective of town boundaries, and that's all the data showing up at the top in the tiny window. So scrolling down, I think we've got, that's about 1,700 parcels across 7 or 8 towns like that. Where do you go from there if you have a tornado? Why not just export it out to Excel, which is what we're doing right now? I believe we get an Internet Explorer pop-up about malicious internet files that we have to click through. But again, this is real time. Yes, open the file. There are all those CAMA records in Excel. Preliminary damage estimate, sum up the values of the building, assume they all got destroyed. The land's probably still going to be there. So within, I don't know, that was what, 90 seconds? Preliminary damage assessment, enough to go to the governor's office and give him an order of magnitude of the problem at least. So this was the goal, and now we're in a fairly good position at the state level to rapidly respond to disasters, which it seems like we got 3 or 4 a year now, I don't know. So our other aspect of serving it out, this web viewer is very powerful, has custom searching, reporting, etc. We also developed a WMS layer, which is a little old school, but we felt this was a good way to get the data out there, and this is just looking at it in ArcGIS. And this gave people the ability to overlay their own data over the parcel map without us actually giving them the source files. We had a little bit of a headache. Nobody ever really puts information behind a WMS layer. It's usually photos. So as you see here, we just clicked on a parcel and we actually tied the owner information to it, including the many-to-ones of condos and boat slips and all that stuff, which was a big pain. But it's done now, so we're keeping it. So those are our 2 methods of serving it up. The WMS, you bring it into ArcGIS and look at your own data with it, and the web platform, which we share out to all the state agencies, and now we're getting started with the pilot project to share it out to the towns as well. So, equalization. What kind of got this project off the ground that we were not intending to do at all? Dave showed you the old DOS-based system. It was great in its time, but has become ridiculously outdated. So here's a quick view of the equalization system that we've developed that's now deployed. We'll just run through one sale just so you get a flavor of it. There's a list of sales in town. We click on the sale. It tries to show us all the CAMA records it thinks are associated with the parcel. You select 1 or 2 or 5, whatever it might be, and then go to the final step where you verify the information about the sale, apply your exclusion codes, and you can also view any tax forms that are associated. In this case, this is an inventory of transferred property form that you have to file. And then you go on to the last step, and you can do file attachments. If you have the MLS record that you think explains something about why you excluded it, you can attach that. And that's it. So that's one sale validated, soup to nuts. We have anywhere from 2,000 sales in the big cities down to 5 or 6 in the small. You'll notice there's a parcel map button over there too. That, once you've linked that sale to the CAMA record, you can bounce out to the parcel map and go straight to that parcel and take a look at it on the map. So we tied that in as well. So wonderful, we built this map, we claim we've deployed it to all these people. Let's talk a little bit about how it's being used in New Hampshire. There's a lot of different ways. From disaster recovery, environmental protection, utilities management, transportation, regional planning. And it's more and more every day. People are constantly banging on our doorstep, especially now that the map is pretty much complete. When we had holes, people weren't very interested. Now that we have the majority of the state, we have quite a bit of interest. So disaster recovery, we're tying into agencies like the Department of Safety, the Emergency Operations Center, the National Guard, and doing that in collaboration with the university. And not only looking at damage assessment, as we talked about, but also in predictive modeling. Where are the floodplains? What if a tornado occurred over here? We do have a nuclear power plant in the state. What happened if something went wrong with that? We're also partnering with the Red Cross to help them look at where they're putting their emergency operations centers and housing and so forth. So disaster recovery is by far the biggest driver and what people like to hear about the most when they give you the data, because you're protecting people, which everybody loves. We also have environmental protection, which is primarily focused on the Department of Environmental Services. Things like wellhead protection, nitrogen loading, wetlands permitting is all now tied through the parcel map, and they're using the web viewer to do it. You also have utilities management, which is really clever. When we first got involved with parcel mapping, the utilities companies kind of came out of the woodwork at us. We were like, huh, you're awfully interested in this. I wonder why that is. And the key is, they often have a database of their customers so they can bill you. They often don't have the location of your meter. If you think about it for 30 seconds, you realize the billing database has the parcel address, the CAMA database has the parcel address, and we found if you link those together, you can get about 95% of your meter locations, at least to the centroid of the parcel, which saves them an unbelievable amount of data collection. You tie that into the transformers and their circuitry, and you can get an outage management system very fast. So they were all very interested, and we've been working through the Public Utilities Commission in the state of New Hampshire to carefully deploy this out to the utilities companies. Of course, everybody is always interested in getting the lights back on when they go out, so everybody's been pretty widely in favor of sharing the data with them, and we're working towards that right now. Transportation planning is another big one. We have, ironically, the largest federal highway project for an interstate going on, mainly because we have one of the only very small interstates left, I-93. So working with the New Hampshire Department of Transportation and the regional planning commissions, they're actually able to do corridor studies, look at the best path for the highway, economic impact, right-of-way issues, and so forth. And they're able to save a tremendous amount of time. As Dave said, representative government, we have to have town meetings about everything so they can notify people about that. Regional planning also gets a tremendous amount of use. We have the 8 regional planning agencies in the state all using this data in the WMS format to bring their data in. And the last one, and this is local assessing. As I said, we have the pilot to serve the data back out to the local officials. And we're approaching this pretty carefully because people are very sensitive about sharing their data in any sort of public format. So the way we've handled it is, if you would like to share with your neighboring communities, and this is assessing official use only, you opt in, we put your data in, and that's the end of it. If you would not like to do that, don't opt in, you're not in, it's fine, no pressure. So you can do unique sales search, property search, analysis on a statewide level. So we'd like to talk a little bit about what we feel the keys to project success are. And we've done it a little bit differently than some people have. There's no right way, but let's talk a little bit about what we've done. Key 1, do not impose standards. This was probably what got us the furthest. Key 2, be transparent and agile. And we'll talk about each of these a little bit. And key 3, design sustainability into your system. So looking at the first key, do not impose standards. So all right, you've got all these towns, what are you going to do? You have no idea what their data is. First thing you need to do is survey the data landscape. So all of a sudden, all your mystery towns, you find out their data. What you find is sometimes surprising. The town in the upper right is way bigger than it should be on the map. The town in red there is twisted 30 degrees, which we found, and has really horrible data quality. So you've surveyed the data landscape, now what do? Develop a plan to integrate the data. Of course, the easiest plan is, let's get rid of these towns that are inconvenient to us. They can come back and play ball when they get a real GIS system. And we'll just take the towns that are in pretty good shape, put them together, create a standardized format, good to go. Now we have our parcel map. There are a couple holes, but they'll figure it out. This is not what we chose to do. We took a little bit different approach and said, let's see if we can fix these towns, adjust them a little bit, scale this one back down to size to make it roughly in proportion to what it should be with respect to other towns. We even converted some of the horrible data up through a project with the DOT. And then bring everything together, making no barriers to participate in the project. Just give us what you have, we'll figure out how to get it in the map somehow. Key 2, be transparent and agile. And I know agile is a little bit of a term, but we'll talk about it. Transparency. Really the biggest thing is a marketing strategy. The technical part of this, not really a huge deal. How do you market this type of project? I think you've gotten the picture. We're focusing on disaster recovery, regional planning, environmental protection. You have to get a core message that resonates with the people that you're trying to justify this to. Once you get a core message, you have to make sure everybody's very clear about your message, which inevitably brings up data privacy. What about data privacy? We just tried to be very clear. We'll only share with state government agencies. We will not make the data public at any time. We will share it with the local assessing communities on a voluntary basis. So we try to be very clear about that. Once you have clarity of message, you've got to get it out there. We use Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, our own website. We post about it on the web. We post about it in newspapers. This is an article from the local newspaper saying how the Department of Revenue lost 30 people and still was able to maintain operations because of the parcel map. Of course, fair and equitable. We'll be signing copies later. It nearly triples their value. The project has also won a couple awards, which I'll tell you a little secret about awards. You only win them if you apply for them. And we do a lot of conference presentations, the goal being just to make sure that everybody knows exactly what we're doing and why we're doing it so that they feel comfortable. This brings in agility. This is the definition of agility, having a resourceful and adaptable character. Of course, ahead of time, you consider your possible problems and develop your solutions. But things come up, accuracy, boundary issues, right to know, income streams. You lied about X, Y, and Z, which we get a lot. We put together a panel of people to deal with these problems as they came up so that we didn't get stymied. And that's really being agile, keeping everything moving. And the third and final point is sustainability. You have to design sustainability into a system like this. And what we talk about with sustainability is data sustainability first. On a daily basis, we get our tax forms. On a weekly basis, we get the deeds updates. On a semi-annual basis, we get CAMA data exports from the taxing jurisdictions. And on an annual basis, we get tax maps. So that's all well and good. This is really getting it done and running the numbers, right? Getting the data in and processing it. This leaves you with the last piece, which is your user sustainability. Serve it up. You have to make sure that when you're collecting this and updating it, you're getting it out to all of your user community so that they can get maximum utility from the project. So what can you do? And this is closing. I know we're about 1 minute left. Getting started on this project from a local perspective, we would encourage you to communicate with your other local assessors. If you're doing a project, collaborate with them. If you can come to a local standard with 3 or 4 of your fellow assessors, go ahead. It's much better if you can get any sort of standardization amongst yourself. And the last thought that we'll leave you with is think globally but act locally. Keep projects like this in mind as you build your data and maintain it, and do what you can at a local level to standardize it as much as you can. And with that, I'd like to thank URISA and IAAO for having us, and I think we've got about 30 seconds for a question, as long as it's not how to spell Albuquerque, which I cannot do.